Remember when I arrived in our financial products area that we had several hundred professionals trying to work down almost $1.1 trillion of notional value of these complex derivatives. Had they executed the plan that was put on them before I arrived, it would have cost AIG $20 billion. Could have been 10, but 20 was the upper limit. Instead of costing us 10 to 20, by keeping those people and getting them to work through the problem and do it in a very appropriate way, instead of costing 10 to 20 billion, we made 4 billion.
So you're saying that that your ability to negotiate executive compensation packages with Treasury turned out in the end to be win-win AIG and the taxpayer?
I think without question. But remember, the taxpayers were angry at this group when they got their $165 million in bonuses. And the problem we have, Ken, is language. Bonuses in the average person's mind is money you get special above and beyond what you're normally paid. In this business, bonuses were part of your normal compensation. What they should have been called is variable salary. That you get a fixed salary, that you get paid regularly. At the end of the year, we'll look at your performance, we'll look at the performance of the company, and you're expected to make a certain amount of money. And if you don't perform to what we expect, you're going to make less than you think. If you do better, you'll make more.
Hello, I'm Kenneth Feinberg, formerly the Special Master for TARP Executive Compensation at the Department of the Treasury during 2009 and 10. What follows is an interview that I conducted with Robert Benmosche, the Chief Executive Officer of AIG Insurance Companies, and a series of slides accompanying that interview that explain the terms, conditions of the statute enacted by Congress and the regulations promulgated by the Department of the Treasury governing executive compensation as to certain TARP companies that receive the most taxpayer assistance. My interview with Robert Benmosche goes a long way in articulating the provisions of federal law governing executive compensation. That interview, coupled with a series of slides highlighting the federal law, the federal regulations from the Treasury Department, and the decisions made by the Special Master for Executive Compensation in 2009 that continue to this day to act as a precedent for subsequent pay packages, provide a type of one-stop shopping that allows the listener and the viewer to better understand the legal niceties and vagaries of the law and regulations. When you look at that, the statute, the regulations, and add to it the insightful reaction and comments by Mr. Benmosche, you have a much better understanding of how the law works, how it's intended to work, and what the legal pitfalls, challenges, and strengths of the law might be. This is slide 1. This is the slide that highlights the statutory authority for creating the special, rather unique executive compensation program promulgated through the Department of the Treasury. The statute was enacted by Congress following the TARP bailout of the most financially distressed companies in the United States as a result of the 2009 financial crisis. After Congress provided taxpayer assistance to Wall Street companies and others in a fit of populist revenge, it announced through a statute that the Treasury Department would regulate the executive pay of the 25 corporate officials in the 7 companies that receive the most taxpayer assistance, that the Treasury Department would have clawback authority to try and recoup money, bonus monies that should not have been spent by those companies, and also the statute prohibited golden parachutes and other perquisites going to these senior corporate officials. All of this part of the statute creating the Treasury Department PAYSAR authority. Slide number 2. The statute spells out in some detail limitations on corporate official compensation among just those 7 companies that receive the most taxpayer assistance: GM, GMAC, now Alley, Chrysler, Chrysler Financial, Bank of America, AIG, and Citigroup. Those 7 companies are the only companies subject to this detailed regulation of pay. And only the top 25 officials in each of those 7 companies, totaling 175 corporate officials. And what the statute says is that pay should be fixed by Treasury to make sure that it excludes excessive risk-taking on the part of these corporate officials, that the Treasury can seek to recover bonus money already paid to those officials, which should now be recouped and returned to the U.S. Treasury, that there should be no golden parachutes or special severance payments or use of corporate jets without the prior approval of the Treasury Department. And the statute spells out that compensation that is paid to these 175 corporate officials should not vest, can vest, but should not be redeemed except 1/3 each year over a 3-year period. All of this part of the statute. Slide 3. We'll now highlight some of these specific statutory provisions. Section 111B3A states that compensation for each of the 175 senior corporate officials should be based on factors and variables that will avoid the corporate official taking unnecessary and excessive risks that threaten the value of the company, a direct assault on what was perceived to be the link between executive compensation and risk-taking that brought about the 2009 financial crisis. Slide number 4. Again, the statute points out in 111B3B that if monies were already paid out and that corporate official benefited improperly from receiving bonuses or other excessive payments, that now the Treasury has the authority under the statute to claw back or to seek to recover all of those bonus payments that were paid based upon improper or excessive risk-taking. Slide number 5. The statute also specifically prohibits golden parachute payments or other special benefits to a departing corporate executive. Congress was concerned that some senior corporate officials, in the wake of the 2009 crisis and the subsequent regulation of pay by Treasury, would exit the company to avoid Treasury oversight, but would exit only with special golden parachute payments, severance payments, excessive pension payments, and other sort of special privileges aimed at corporate officials leaving the company and shutting out the lights. This provision makes clear that any corporate official working for one of these 7 companies should not have built into his or her contract special, unique severance payments or benefits that would only accrue and become due and owing if the corporate official decides to leave the company. Slide number 6. This provision, 111B3D, is critical. It makes clear that any compensation that is provided and approved by the Treasury Department should not be a total package that is based on guaranteed money, that is immediately redeemable if it's stock, that is not tied to the overall growth and good fortune of the company for which the corporate executive works. So this provision makes clear that Treasury should make sure that any corporate compensation package for a senior executive official should be tied to the overall success of the company going forward financially. That at least 1/3 of the total amount of annual compensation should be in the form of stock, not cash, that would be redeemable over a period of time, not immediately, no short-term fixes. That the amount of guaranteed base income, salary, should be limited, should not be assured regardless of corporate performance. And most importantly, the statute confers on the Secretary of the Treasury the authority to establish such other terms and conditions as are necessary to implement the meaning and the mission articulated in the statute. Slide number 7. The regulations found in the Federal Register, the United States Federal Register, in 31 CFR, the code, the Federal Register, 30.16A1, this provision delegates from the Secretary of the Treasury to a quasi-independent special master the responsibility and the authority to interpret, construe, and implement the federal statute that we've just discussed. In other words, this is the provision, slide 7, which provides the special master at Treasury his authority to implement executive pay guidelines and rules based on the statute, delegating to the Secretary of the Treasury, and now the Secretary of the Treasury delegating to a quasi-independent individual official at Treasury this authority to implement regulations pursuant to the statute regulating pay. Slide number 8. We are now looking at the Federal Register regulations. We've moved on from the statute, and now we're examining various specific regulations promulgated by the special master to implement the statutory directive. For example, slide 8 refers to the clawback authority, the look-back review, the authority of the special master to look at the previous compensation provided these 175 corporate officials. And if that compensation was given in a manner or based on determinations inconsistent with the statute, contrary to the public interest, broad discretion is conferred on the special master to seek to claw back that money, get it back into the Treasury in order to repay the TARP loans authorized by Congress. Slide number 9. 31 CFR section 30.16A3 is the bedrock regulation giving authority or providing the special master with authority to determine the pay packages, the total compensation packages for each of 175 officials subject to the statute. This is the provision that the special master looks to for his authority to consider, analyze, evaluate, and determine what the total compensation package should be for each of these senior corporate officials in just these 7 companies subject to these regulations. Slide number 10. The regulations also confer on the special master the authority to issue advisory opinions, not mandatory, advisory, that guide other companies other than the top 7 when it comes to compensation and compensation incentives. So that if any company in the United States, one of 450 roughly, that received some degree of TARP federal taxpayer assistance in the wake of the 2009 financial meltdown, if any one of those companies seek advice from the special master on how to fashion, design, or implement compensation packages for senior officials, this regulation in slide 10 confers on the special master that authority to issue an advisory opinion, not binding, but an advisory opinion concerning either a request from a company or the special master on his own motion can issue an advisory opinion concerning compensation, compensation structures, compensation packages. The goal is to make more pervasive the moral authority of the special master in influencing compensation decisions. Slide 11 is a mechanical provision, 30.16C1. This is the provision that spells out the timeline for the special master to consider a compensation information provided by each of the 7 companies for their top 25 corporate officials. And once the package that is submitted by Citigroup or Bank of America or AIG, any one of the 7, once the compensation package is deemed to be substantially complete, quote, substantially complete, unquote, that triggers the 60-day rule by which time the special master shall render his compensation package decision for each of those individuals in the company where their application has been deemed substantially complete and they've submitted whatever information they want to submit. If any one of the companies or the official in the company challenges the determination of the special master, there is an additional 30 days for which the special master shall reconsider his decision and then render a final decision. So within a total of 60 days from the time a submission comes in substantially complete, that is the period when the special master shall consider and render his decision. If challenged, an additional 30 days is tacked on so that the compensation decision will be a total of 90 days from the time of the initial submission being deemed substantially complete. Slide number 12. This provision, 30.16A3, confers wide discretion on the special master to consider in establishing current pay packages for 2009 or 2010 or 2011 prior compensation decisions, so that the special master may, in announcing a compensation package for 2010, for example, for one of these 175 corporate officials at one of these 7 companies, the special master may note that that corporate official is already receiving, maybe I'm making this up, maybe $1 million in prior payments, guaranteed pre-financial crisis, pay that was presented as a bonus for signing on with the company. The special master may consider other sources of annual compensation made available to that corporate official in concluding what the current compensation package should be. In this way, the special master is not required to be oblivious or ignorant of other money already being paid that corporate official pre-TARP, pre the enactment of the statute creating this program. So Congress and the Treasury wisely understood that the special master is not, his hands are not tied in taking into account bonus money or sign-on money, otherwise guaranteed and now being paid in establishing a total corporate pay package today. Slide number 13. This is an important provision. It says that as to these 7 companies, not only shall the special master determine the total pay packages for the top 25 officials in each of those 7 companies, but in addition, the special master shall announce the compensation structure, the variables, the rules, the terms and conditions that should govern the company in determining compensation for corporate officials 26 through 100. So, in one regulation and the statute, the special master is delegated the authority to set the pay, the package, for the top 25 officials in each of 7 companies. The regulations go on to say that in addition to that, the overall compensation structure, not the individual compensation packages, but the overall compensation structure, should also be established by the special master with the authority delegated to him by the Secretary of the Treasury. Slide 14. In determining now what factors should enter into any individual compensation decision, let's focus on how the rules and regulations provide guidance to the special master in deciding what variables or what factors should enter into the decision as to what an individual's total compensation package should look like. And we start off with the overall regulation in 30.16b1, the overall enabling regulation that says, special master, when you decide what to pay each individual, take into account the following considerations. That's the basic introduction to the special master's roadmap, his blueprint for considering pay for each of the 25 individuals in the 7 companies. Slide 15. The first element to consider. Special master, when you decide what the compensation structure or the individual compensation determination should look like, make sure that you align corporate performance with long-term growth of the company. Make sure that you provide a compensation package that will not incentivize a corporate official to take unnecessary or excessive risks in order to earn their corporate money. Make sure that the corporate decision, that the compensation decision, disfavors large guaranteed compensation that immunizes a corporate official from taking very care with the company, because if it's guaranteed cash and the corporate official knows that he'll be paid or she'll be paid a guaranteed cash amount no matter what, that incentivizes corporate officials to take risk, because the risk that they're taking will have no bearing on their guaranteed compensation. So point number one, compensation should be aligned with long-term careful growth of the company, avoiding unnecessary or excessive risk. Slide 16. The second principle to guide the special master, make sure that the compensation packages are not punitive. Do not punish corporate officials. Just as we, in the previous slide, we don't want corporate officials taking excessive risk through guaranteed income. Now the flip side of that, principle number 2, make sure that your corporate decision, that your compensation decisions encourage the company to recruit good talent, that encourage the company to be a competitive enterprise, that you're going to get the right people in the right positions to make the company prosper so that the company can eventually pay back the taxpayer for all the money that was borrowed as part of the TAR program. The individual compensation determinations should be the type of determinations that attract competitive talent so that the top recipient can remain competitive and eventually repay the taxpayer. Slide 17. In deciding how to establish and create a total corporate compensation package for each individual, let's divide up that package between short-term and long-term compensation incentives. Let's provide guaranteed cash. After all, a corporate official has to live on a monthly check and take care of his family or her family, etc. So provide a small, relatively modest amount of guaranteed cash. Then let's make sure that the remainder of that compensation package is in the form of stock, what we call salarized stock, that will be paid to that corporate official over the course of the year. But that stock may not be redeemed or cashed out except 1/3 in year 1, 1/3 in year 2, and 1/3 in year 3, thereby assuring that the corporate official's annual compensation is tied to the value of the stock, and the value of the stock is tied to relatively long-term performance by the corporation. In other words, the corporate official's total package for compensation is directly linked inextricably to the stock and the value of that stock, which can only be redeemed over time as the company improves its performance. The corporate official's total compensation rises or falls depending on the overall growth of the corporation of which that corporate official is an integral part. That's the design or the idea behind the diversified compensation variables that enter into each corporate official compensation package. Slide 18 states the obvious, the rule 30.16B14. Compensation is tied, should be tied to overall performance of the official and the company. As I just pointed out, we'll give each corporate official a guaranteed cash component to annual compensation. But the remainder of that compensation will be based on the performance of the company. If the company performs well and the stock goes up in value, a windfall for the corporate official. If over time the company's performance is poor, the stock drops in value, so too will the total compensation package of the corporate official. There is a direct link between overall compensation earned by the corporate official and the ongoing performance of the company. And there is a clear line of authority between corporate performance, company performance, and the total cash and the total compensation offered a corporate official for any given year. Slide 19. The special master, in deciding what a compensation package should look like, and in making sure that the corporate officials in these 7 companies are not at a competitive disadvantage, shall examine the pay packages and pay structures of other businesses not subject to the special master's jurisdiction. Remember, there are only 7 companies and 175 corporate officials subject to the special master's jurisdiction. This specific regulation permits the special master, in deciding what the packages should look like, to examine a competitor's pay packages in trying to make sure that these 7 companies are not ultimately at a competitive disadvantage. Slide number 20. This provision, 30.16B16, states the obvious. The overall compensation package of each of the 25 corporate officials in the 7 companies, total of 175 corporate officials, that each of their compensation packages should be linked to how that corporate official performs in improving the overall value of the company. It's obvious. When you give a corporate official a large chunk of salarized stock, that stock is not immediately redeemable. That stock has to be held for a period of years. You are linking overall company performance with what that corporate official will ultimately make in terms of annual compensation. Merit-based compensation. No guarantees, bonuses, guaranteed severance payments, etc. Slide 21. This is an administrative regulation making it clear that once the special master makes a decision concerning a compensation package, they are deemed to be, these decisions, Treasury determinations, conferring on the special master the authority to render these determinations in a final form without excessive appeals. Once the special master renders a decision, that decision is final, and that shall be the compensation package for each of the individuals. This is an important provision in conferring final binding authority on the special master, that authority delegated to him by the Secretary of the Treasury pursuant to a statute which delegated this authority to the Treasury Department in the first instance. Slide 22. Let's examine now, using these regulatory principles and these statutory directives that we've talked about before. In slide 22, let's begin to look at the actual 2009 Special Master TARP executive compensation rulings. Point number 1 in this 2009 report. We reject cash bonuses based on short-term performance. Instead, we'll give each of the corporate officials stock in the company, which must be held for the relative long term. And that replaces any cash guarantee that promotes risk or excessive risk-taking by linking compensation to long-term company performance. The goal is to link corporate pay to the overall performance of the company. Slide 23. In 2009, as a result of these principles, the Special Master concluded, first, that cash compensation, guaranteed cash, for each of these corporate officials should be reduced by more than 90%. That no corporate official should receive more than a base guaranteed cash salary of $500,000, preferably a good deal less. That the overall pay packages of these 7 companies, the overall, stock plus cash, should be reduced by more than 50% without penalizing the corporate official or risking the competitive edge of the company. And that, if necessary, we'll waive some of these rules in order to make sure, as already discussed, that the company remains competitive in the marketplace and can still attract first-rate talent. Next, in the Special Master's 2009 ruling, slide 24, it stated, the Special Master's report stated, that although the salarized stock provided each corporate official will vest immediately the minute the stock is issued during that particular year of 2009, the stock vests immediately. But it may only be sold, as already indicated, in 1/3 installments, either beginning in 2011, 2012, and 2013, or we'll let you, corporate official, redeem that stock earlier if the company has repaid TARP. Bank of America and Citigroup quickly in 2010 repaid TARP, every dime plus interest to the taxpayer, so that they would be out from under the thumb of the Special Master for executive pay. But that's a very important provision. Next, if one of these 7 companies wants to provide bonus compensation over and above base cash salary and salarized stock redeemable in 1/3 installments, if you want to provide in addition more bonus compensation, you can do so. However, it can only be paid in the form of long-term stock. And that stock can only be redeemed, the excessive bonus stock can only be redeemed if the company is repaying TARP and or at least 3 more years go by before the stock can be redeemed. So bonus compensation is allowed. Remember, there's 3 types of compensation under this statute. 1, basic guaranteed cash under $500,000, guaranteed and payable during the year. 2, salarized stock, stock which makes up part of the base compensation package. But salarized stock can only be redeemed in 1/3 installments beginning in 2011 for 2009. You have to sit on it. And it can only be redeemed as the company grows and prospers. 3, finally, there can be other stock, other bonus money provided a corporate official, but that bonus money must be in the form of stock. It can only be redeemed as TOP is repaid and or after 3 years of vesting. Slide 26. Slide 26 is the 2009 report of the Special Master limiting any other form of compensation, especially no golden parachutes, no private jets, no country club dues, no perquisites or other compensation that would undercut the overall financial cabinization of a compensation package for each of the 25 corporate officials. Slide 27. Up to now, all 26 slides previously discussed involve the rules and regulations and statutory directives governing the calculation of compensation, right? How much will a corporate official earn based on these principles and these directives? Slide 27 moves off of that discussion and focuses instead on the need of a corporate governance reform. Slide 27 reflects Section 30.4A of the Code of Federal Register, saying that one corporate governance recommendation, is the need for a top recipient, one of these 7 companies, to establish an independent compensation committee. An independent compensation committee that will make sure that any ongoing compensation package will avoid unnecessary and excessive risks, and that compensation will be determined or recommended by a truly independent compensation committee. Slide 28. In addition to an independent compensation committee, the corporate governance requirements of Section 30.11c provide new disclosure requirements concerning compensation consultants. Who are they? Where did they come from? What's their provenance, their background, their pedigree? How independent are they? Are these the type of compensation consultants that will really act independently and render fair, impartial decisions on compensation without a conflict of interest or even a perceived conflict of interest? That's slide 28. Slide 29. Each of the 7 companies must disclose to the Special Master and Treasury any and all special perquisites or special treatment in excess of $25,000 per individual, and anything above $25,000 in total for each individual in the form of severance payments or special payments or country club dues or use of a private jet, etc. Anything above $25,000 per individual must receive the approval in advance by the Special Master and Treasury. Slide 30. Each top recipient, not just 7, but all 450 that receive TARP, are subject to clawback authority by the Special Master. That is, a top recipient may be required by the Special Master to seek to recover bonus payments already made to certain corporate officials if the bonus was based upon, quote, materially inaccurate performance metric criteria, unquote. This provision, 30.8 in the Code of Federal Register, gives the special master authority to seek to claw back or recover monies already paid corporate officials in appropriate cases. Slide 31. Shareholders must be afforded an opportunity to have a say on pay. That is, shareholders, even if it's not binding on the company, shareholders must at least be given an opportunity. If you're one of 450 top recipients, shareholders must at least be given an opportunity to comment on the pay packages to be implemented as to each corporate official in these 450 top companies. This is a corporate governance provision. Say on pay. Non-binding shareholder approval or disapproval of corporate pay packages. Slide 32. If any one of 450 top recipients are engaged in excessive or luxury expenditures, public disclosure is required. And the regulations, 30.12, discuss what the definition is of excessive or luxury expenditure policy. The idea is sunlight, full disclosure. If there are special expenditures inuring to the benefit only of senior corporate officials, let's disclose them, let's make them transparent, let shareholders and the public know exactly what they are. Slide 33 prohibits, 30.11d, prohibits getting around these rules and regulations by using tax gross-ups as a means of increasing the package, total compensation package. So what good is it if you limit base salary to under $500,000 in cash, provide salarized stock over time, if when it comes time to pay the IRS, the company simply pays the tax for the recipient or engages in tax policy that will prevent tax payments from coming out of the pocket of the individual corporate official, him or herself. This provision, 30.11d, prohibits a company from coming to the financial assistance of a corporate official in that company by cooperating or coordinating with that official in using tax gross-ups as a means of increasing the total package. Slide 34, and the last slide. Slide 34 simply says that when one of the 7 companies submits the requested pay packages for each of the 25 officials in that company, the top 25 officials, that when that is done, the company will also certify the CEO and the CFO will certify that the information provided to special master is true and accurate and complies with all aspects of the statute and the pertinent regulations. These 34 slides with this basic oral annotation are designed to summarize in one convenient package the unique statutory and regulatory authority of the Department of the Treasury in, 1, setting compensation packages for 175 individual corporate officials at 7 specific companies that receive the most taxpayer assistance to survive. 2, these provisions also articulate the authority of the special master to at least define the compensation structures that should govern for corporate officials 26 through 100 in each of these 7 companies. And 3, in various respects, these slides also spell out the corporate governance provisions and authority that the special master has not only as to the 7 companies and the 175 officials or officials 26 through 100, but certain advisory and mandatory authority over all other companies that received any federal TARP financial assistance, about 450 companies in total. This summarizes executive compensation under federal statutory and regulatory law. Thank you.
Today, a very special guest, Robert Benmosche, the President and Chief Executive Officer of AIG. Mr. Benmosche, we thank you, Bob, for being here today and appreciate it.
Pleasure, Ken. Great to be with you.
Now, let me ask you a question right off the top. The subject today is executive compensation. Nobody in the past few years has lived that issue, at least in terms of the federal government's involvement with executive compensation, more than you. I start off with the obvious question. You came into AIG, immediately confronted this statute, which required by law the Department of the Treasury, acting through an administrator, a special master, I was appointed by the Secretary, to actually calculate dollars and cents for key corporate officials at AIG and a few other companies. Wise statute, wise legislation, or overreaction, symbolism, a mistake? What did you think? You have to deal with it.
Well, I think there's several layers of this. First of all, you can't forget about the public anger. And what the public saw was people taking big bets and the bets not paying off, and the taxpayer had to step in and save the banks and save the savings of many people throughout this country. And by the way, had the bets paid off, they would have gotten huge bonuses. And so the public was angry. And here you have AIG, which took unbelievable bets in terms of credit default swaps and so on. As you know, it cost them almost $50 billion just in that one area alone. And then the government comes in, and in the end, it was close to $182 billion of support to AIG because of what happened. And it's the taxpayers' money that's at risk. And then we're going to pay all this compensation to the people who caused the problem. And so the law really said that we have to be careful of how we pay people. And I think initially it was to limit the amount of bonus money people could get.
Did you find when you took this on, and now you're at AIG and you've got these countless problems, you're trying to right the ship, did you find that this subject of executive compensation, the federal statute, Ken Feinberg there interfering, urging, imploring, negotiating, did you find that this posed more of a problem than you had hoped and took more of your time? I mean, one thing I remember, Bob, is you were actively involved in this. It wasn't like you sent somebody down to Treasury. You took flights back and forth. How much of this occupied your crisis management attention?
I would say that compensation in my first 4 months at AIG was probably 20% of my time, which is unbelievable.
A lot.
A lot. It was huge compared to what. Remember when I arrived in our financial products area, that we had several hundred professionals trying to work down almost $1.1 trillion of notional value of these complex derivatives. Had they executed the plan that was put on them before I arrived, it would have cost AIG $20 billion. Could have been 10, but 20 was the upper limit. Instead of costing us 10 to 20, by keeping those people and getting them to work through the problem and do it in a very appropriate way. Instead of costing 10 to 20 billion, we made 4 billion.
So you're saying that that your ability to negotiate executive compensation packages with Treasury turned out in the end to be win-win AIG and the taxpayer?
I think without question. But remember, the taxpayers were angry at this group when they got their $165 million in bonuses. And the problem we have, Ken, is language. Bonuses in the average person's mind is money you get special above and beyond what you're normally paid. In this business, bonuses were part of your normal compensation. What they should have been called is variable salary. That you get a fixed salary, that you get paid regularly. At the end of the year, we'll look at your performance, we'll look at the performance of the company, and you're expected to make a certain amount of money. And if you don't perform to what we expect, you're going to make less than you think. If you do better, you'll make more. But so let's take an individual today in America that makes $50,000 a year. I may say, and we're doing this for some of our people, that of that $50,000 next year, I'm going to pay you $45,000. The other $5,000, however, you have to continue to do a good job. If you don't, I may not pay that to you. You say, well, wait a minute, I'm making $50,000 a year. You're cutting my pay. No, I'm not, Ken. I'm going to pay you the $5,000, just do a good job. But if you don't do a good job, I may cut it in half. You may only get $2,500. But you know what, Ken? If you do really good next year and you're my best performer, I may give you 10.
Now, let me ask a couple of basic questions the public always asks.
Right.
I read about it every day in the financial news, and I'd like the expert opinion of Bob Benmosche. First, did executive compensation to key people at AIG or Citigroup or GM or et cetera, did executive compensation and risk-taking, did it play a major role in the financial crisis in 2008, or is it a minor problem relative to some other considerations?
I don't think compensation played the role that everybody thinks it played.
Explain.
I think that people are given a compensation program. They work towards that compensation program. Give me objectives and I will achieve them. And that's how I'm getting paid. On the other hand, there's management. And you have to start managing the risks of the business and deciding at what level you'll pay and how you determine what success is. If you just pay me on revenues, I will drive revenues. If you then say to me, I'm going to pay you, Ken, on profits, then I have to worry about my expenses. But if you don't pay me for profits, only for revenue, and somebody else will manage expenses, then that's what I will do. So I think the compensation programs did drive behavior where people went out and did complicated things to make more money, but the companies didn't manage the risks appropriately, and they should have constrained some of the things that people did.
So what you're really saying is, as an expert who's lived through this whole post-2008 crisis, the public's idea that the drive to make more money drove companies into the tank or into very serious financial distress, your answer is it's about people. Don't blame executive comp as such. It's the people that are managing individuals, what the incentives are, what their priorities and objectives are. That's much more important than just laying it at the foot of executive comp as a subject matter.
Exactly. What I've said to people is that some people say, I want a formula. And let me talk about in my brokerage experience. And you're running a branch with stockbrokers. And all of a sudden you see one of your best salesmen, best stockbrokers, doing things that are not appropriate. Worried about it. And you say, you know what? I get paid a percentage of what they sell. But I'm going to fire that person. If I fire that person, I'll make less money. So now the question becomes, gee, should I be the one firing it, or should it be somebody else in the company telling me to fire them or what have you? What I instituted is that I'm going to put subjectivity into your compensation program. I'll decide how you did your business as well as how much you did. And so I may say to that manager, because you fired that big producer and you've taken in less income, I'm going to pay you more because you did the right thing. And so part of the compensation issues we have to address is when we have formulas with no subjectivity. You understand clawback, you put it in the program. If you do something this year that doesn't work next year, we're going to take it back. We have to start building judgment into our compensation program so that when people don't do business the right way, we as executives and managers can say, I know what you thought you're going to get paid. Let me tell you why I have decided the formula, in your case, Ken, is not going to work.
But doesn't that promote uncertainty within the company? Don't people wonder, what is the subjective attitude? What are the variables that Benmosche will apply when it comes to pay? There's nothing certain about it. It's all sort of in the ether. It's up to Bob that day. How do you respond to that?
Well,
or is there a culture that is understood?
It's not a culture, it's a process. For example, we now look at almost 50,000 of our employees every year for performance management. We committed to you and others in the government, we will pay for performance. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means if you think about levels of employees, senior people, the middle management, non-management, we go through and we actually rate you. Who's in the top 10%? Who's in the next 20, the next 50, and the bottom 20? We force that throughout the organization, but it can't be done in little groups. And so we do what we call roundtables. And we bring everybody together and we think about, okay, here's all my people. Who really had a distinguishing year? And we have over 1,000 meetings of people arguing about, did Ken do a better job than Bob, and why did he do it? What was his goals and objectives at the beginning of the year? How well did he do? Did he do all things the right way? And did he cut corners? Did he not cut corners, and so on? We think that through for the entire company.
How do you manage AIG? It's such a vast, international, global, complex institution. How do you develop the culture, the understanding, the factors that will enter into compensation? Doesn't it vary from division to division, company to company, person to person? How do you develop that in a way that it's sort of institutionalized and people understand it?
Well, first of all, what we made clear to the company, that you're going to get your fixed salary, and we're going to add a little variable salary. And that will be paid on your performance. And so the first thing you want to do, instead of waiting till the end of the year, make sure you talk to your boss and find out, how are you going to evaluate me at the end of the year? It forces employees to talk to their managers and vice versa, saying, how are you going to measure me? What numbers, what goals, and what's expected of me? And if we understand what's expected of ourselves, then you understand the ground rules, number one.
Second question on executive comp, you lived through it. If there's one argument that Treasury heard over and over again, not only from AIG, but from the 6 other companies, Citigroup, Bank of America, GM, GMAC, Chrysler Financial, Ken Feinberg, be careful. You have singled out by statute 7 companies. Executive pay determined by the government, by Treasury, will put us at a competitive disadvantage. Do not underestimate the impact of reduced pay, Congress wants it, on our competitiveness. You made that argument, but how much truth is there to the argument that the pay structure imposed by Treasury, negotiated out with Bob Benmosche, would have a positive or a negative impact on AIG's real competitiveness in the marketplace?
It was a problem the first year. People, as you know, AIG was said publicly that it's going to be sold off. It's going to go away. The company won't make it. The American taxpayer is going to lose tens, if not 20s of billions of dollars. It will never pay back to government, and so therefore it's going to go bankrupt, and so on and so forth. If I'm paying my executives in AIG stock, and it may go bankrupt, and they've already lost a fortune of money, then the question becomes, I may have to just give up my career because it looks like I'm not going to make anything.
But go ahead.
So part of our challenge is to show that the company will make it, and they're part of being able to make it. And so in the beginning it was hard. Today it's far less hard. We are recruiting some of the most talented people around, and we're still in the same structure. And that's because people want to work for a successful company. That's first and foremost. They want to be paid. They want to be able to make a decent living, and they want to be able to save for their retirement. And so that's all part of the compensation program. You have to be competitive, but it's not enough. You have to also give them a will and a want to work. And I'll give you one example, if I may, Ken. This is really important. We were really attacking the people at Financial Products in Wilton, Connecticut, in the press, in the Congress, and everywhere.
I remember that.
It was terrible. People were afraid to go home. Their children were beat up in school because they worked for AIG. What a terrible thing and a terrible statement for our country and people in it. But the people stayed. We cut their pay, you remember that? We cut their cash payments, you knew that. What the American public didn't know is that the bonuses they were getting, a good part of that went into a deferred compensation pool. And this is one of the myths, that there were no consequences. That deferred compensation pool was sitting almost negative $50 billion. So it wasn't $165 million to them. Part of it went into the pool and never came out. And so they got a limited amount. But you know what? Everyone stayed once they realized we were going to pay them something, because they wanted to see it through and do the right thing, because they took pride in how they do their job.
Well,
and that's important.
I remember you saying in your frequent visits to see me at Treasury, you kept saying to me, it's not only about responding to congressional directives, the statute. The fact of the matter is, Ken, if you want me to restore the morale of the company, you've got to give me some leeway, and you've got to give me some way with these senior executives to have confidence going forward. And I take it, I don't at all diminish that argument, but it sounds to me, based on what you earlier said, even more than the money was your cheerleading and your arrival and your determination to right the ship and provide a morale booster. I'm still not convinced that the compensation part of it was anywhere near as important as your personal role in going to Connecticut and other units and convincing people, trust me, give it time, we'll turn the corner.
I think that don't underestimate the need to get paid.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the challenge was we wanted to take away much of their pay. We succeeded in giving them pay. We succeeded in giving them pay that will come down the road, and it was appropriate, and it allowed them to stay and earn money. Of the 10 people that reported to me when I arrived at AIG, here's another myth. There was no consequences, and nobody lost any real money. Of the 10 senior executives, they lost $168 million of prior pay. That is a lot of money, but that was pay that was forfeited because the company had a problem. And so they lost that money. Many of them never sold their AIG stock. They lost all that money. They're getting about 1 cent on the dollar. And so that money was lost. Their future was lost. And so they needed to know they could pay some bills. I will tell you that when the CEO of Chrysler appeared in the paper right during that period of time, and he had his home foreclosed on because you wouldn't pay him, I don't think executives who are making decisions to take down a $1.1 trillion massive portfolio of credit default swaps, which is so complex, you want them going home and facing foreclosure in their homes. You have to pay them something to be able to live the way they had lived. And so once we satisfied that, there was tremendous morale. Look, when you demanded that the people who promised to give back bonuses did it, you knew that this was done where everybody contributed, because in the end, we treated them appropriately on their pay. We started to show them respect. And then they said, you know what, let's all live up to the commitment and give back the money to the government. And even people who didn't promise gave back money.
Now let's talk a little bit about this. Recently, Jamie Dimon testified before the Senate Banking Committee. And in response to a question, he said, it's likely, in quotes, not guaranteed, it's likely that we will seek clawback of some of the compensation from those individuals deemed to be, internally at least, responsible for the recent financial losses at Morgan. The public hears this whole notion of clawback. Clawback. We're going to ask employees to give back, or we're going to require employees to give back compensation because of problems that ultimately it deemed to be they created. One, how difficult is it, this clawback authority? Two, how familiar are you, going back many years in your wide experience, with this whole subject of clawback, is it a real option? Or is it rare indeed, whether legally binding contracts or other reasons? How effective as an enforcement mechanism is the very idea of clawback?
Well, I think that it depends on how you start out. And first of all, the method used by many banks and financial companies for clawback was stock. They paid you in stock. They restricted the stock. You couldn't get your stock for several years. So if we talk about this financial crisis, Ken, and I know people said there was no stock and so on down. If you look at the amount of money lost by the executives of the banks and the financial institutions, it's significant. Because that was the clawback mechanism, that if the company doesn't do well and the stock goes down, you will have enough stock in this company that will make a difference for you too. So people lost bonuses because it was put in stock.
That's automatic. That's automatic based on the value of the stock.
Right. Then you have clawback, which is now being designed into compensation programs. I'm on the board of Credit Suisse. We already have a clawback that says a certain percentage of your compensation's in cash. It will be held for a period of 3 to 4 years. And during that period of time, if your division has any of these following issues, or you had issues, we will automatically take back this amount of money. And so it's there, it's very well defined, very well understood. The problem I had with the clawback at AIG was, quite frankly, that some of the people actually were being clawed back that didn't see that they had anything to do with the problem with the company, and they didn't. And so we were clawing back from a group, and they understood that this is what we need to do to move forward and do the right thing.
Now, one problem with clawback, I think you're one exception. You have to make a distinction between people who are still at the company, where you have some leverage to clawback, and in the AIG situation, we at Treasury were a little bit stunned at your ability to claw back money from a group, a division where some of the employees were still there, others had long since departed, and yet you managed to come up with a chunk, I think it was about $45 million, that had been promised to Congress to be brought back to the Treasury coffers. Any magical formula you want to share with us as to how you personally went about trying to live up to that demand from Treasury to get that money back from employees and former employees? What lessons were learned?
Well, I think that what I appeal to everybody is that we're all part of this situation. You made some good money while you were here. You lost a lot of money because of what happened. But in the end, we should do the right thing. And so we need everybody to commit and play. And so I'm willing to negotiate with some people. I wanted to do it voluntarily, and I wanted people to play. But in the end, some people played hardball. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to pay you what I owe you, but I'm going to take a haircut anyway. And I want you to sue me. You sue me. And then after you get done suing me, your lawyer will make the money, not you. You can feel good that you took us on, and I'm going to stand tall because I don't care if the company had trouble, and I may have been part of it or not. I'm not going to pay, but you need to sue me. And when you sue us, then we'll decide what happens when it goes to the court. Now, finally, they gave up the lawsuit.
They blinked.
No.
They blinked? Did anybody sue you?
We had a big lawsuit in London. We had several people sue us. They have all now come to peace. And I think they've learned a lesson, and that is that in the end, that all of us can sleep better about ourselves and look ourselves in the mirror if we do the right thing. And sometimes you have to just accept that something happened and accept that for the collective good, you need to give back. And that was what I asked for. And the good news is, I think almost 97% of all of the former and current employees of financial products volunteered to give money.
Now,
very few didn't.
It's an interesting fact. Now, how much of this clawback, you mentioned a company where you now have a provision for clawback, how much of this is the direct result, this clawback authority, this this awareness among companies to preserve that clawback option? How much of that is the direct result of the financial crisis and a sort of new recognition that companies need something like that authority? Or would you say it's always been there, there's nothing new about this clawback authority, it may be more pronounced today, but you recall it back before the crisis, maybe years ago? Or how much of it is more of recent development?
I would say it's all recent.
It is. And is it the result of the
Absolutely, it's a result of the crisis. The only clawback, as I said, was stock performance, which, as you say, is automatic. But that was putting your compensation at risk for the future and how well you long-term think about the company. But still, that was the only mechanism. So I think it's different. And part of what I'm now arguing for is you can't wait till something goes wrong because the formula drove the payment and the formula turned out to be wrong. You need to start accepting that there needs to be subjectivity in compensation around this very strong process. And that's why we do performance management. That's why we do roundtables. That's why we have these conversations, goals and objectives. We have to pay people in a business that's about results, not only for the results they get, but for the results they don't get. And that has to do with sales practices in this business, compliance in this business. We are responsible for people's money and their safety and their concern about their future. And we have to be prudent about that. And sometimes it requires us to be careful when we look at how people serve that public. When they don't do it the right way, we need to get rid of them. But you can't only pay a manager for what we produce and not the good decisions they make by eliminating production that just isn't healthy for the organization.
Now, when we were at Treasury, when I was doing this with you, the law required the Treasury Department to impose on these 7 companies, of which AIG was one, this notion that compensation would be spread, there'd be a certain base salary, and then the remainder of that annual compensation would be spread out over a 2-3 year period in stock, which would rise or fall based on the performance of the company. I take it, listening to you here today on Critical Debrief, that this was something you not only endorsed, this type of longer-term payout, but actually were promoting independently at AIG anyway, tying total comp to a longer-term performance matrix.
And I've done it at AIG, I've done it at MetLife, and I've done it, and part of it at Payne Weber when I was on Wall Street, and even way back in the early days when I was at Chase Manhattan Bank. These are all concepts that are very important and have been around for a long time. The problem I do have with the law is the law says only 30% of your compensation can be incentive. You know, for executives to provide results, you really need to not pay out all this money on a fixed basis. And my concern is that when I pay a stock salary today, while that does give a performance based to the stock, the problem is it's fully vested. And so I don't have a golden handcuff. So I'm paying out millions and millions of dollars to people, and they can quit and go work someplace else.
But they
tomorrow.
can't redeem the stock.
They cannot redeem it. But what's important for me as an employer is I'd rather have more of that compensation where it's in the incentive pool with clawback, so it's there, but it's tied to incentive objectives, so it just doesn't roll off and come to you. You have to perform for it. And then if what you do is wrong, they will claw it back. So it's a little bit too fixed, and I think what's happening is we move more people to fixed salaries, and we reduce this idea of incentive. I think that there's a problem of performance over time. What's made America great is all these wonderful incentive systems, capitalism, free market systems, and people can, the sky's the limit. Look at Facebook. Young boy gets to be so wealthy. All of this is the American dream that anybody can do it, but you have to have regulation. You have to have constraints. You have to make sure that this is the way you'll operate and do business. So you set the ground rules, and then you oversee it and you manage it to that aspect.
Is American business today, now you can pontificate a little bit, it's not just AIG I'm asking you about, but is American business today overregulated, underregulated, about right?
I think that it's struggling with what it means by regulation. And regulation can't be that the regulators are so much in control that nothing could ever go wrong. What the regulators have to do, especially in the financial arena, forget about EPA and all the other regulations to make sure the environment stays sound and so on, we've got to make sure that we prevent a disaster. So part of my worry a little bit, and you talk about Jamie Dimon and the issues of JP Morgan, $2 billion loss for JP Morgan on a pre-tax basis just isn't, it's a big number, but a real big number is $1 trillion. They're not going to put $1 trillion at risk. And so what happened was there was a legitimate issue. A system was put in. It didn't give the right information. They would have figured it out sooner or later anyway. Somebody leaked it to the press, so it looks like they got caught with a gotcha. But the fact is, what I worry about, Ken, is when somebody says, where was the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve doesn't supervise the bank. They're looking at for the process and the controls and the size of things. And quite frankly, as a regulator, I shouldn't worry about J.P. Morgan, the size of that institution, losing $2 to $4 billion. I have to worry about whether they made a bet that could cost them the company. AIG could not handle $182 billion of issues.
Was that a regulatory failure as well as an AIG failure?
There was no regulator other than a very small part of the federal government. There was a regulator, but it was really the management. And so quite frankly, the management didn't manage the company and its problems well. In all due respect to Mr. Greenberg, I think he built an incredible company. I believe had Hank Greenberg been sitting there watching this going on in 2006, 7, and 8, he would have acted much more decisively than was happening here. He would have recognized the problems as it began to surface, and he would have done something about it before it was a catastrophe. And that's where it should be. It should have been with the executive team.
So if you're right about that argument that, regulation ought to not micromanage, it can't micromanage. It's a free society, a free market. There is a role for regulators, but let's not overregulate, micromanage. Well, how do you respond, Bob, to a lot of the corporate governance reforms that are being either implemented or suggested, say on pay, independent compensation committees, split the CEO role from chairman of the board, various structural corporate governance changes? Are these wise as a matter of public policy, or you can have all the corporate governance reforms you want. If the people aren't right and management isn't right, it isn't going to matter. Where is sort of Benmosche on generally the definition, or where does he come out on the issue of corporate governance?
I think it all matters.
It all matters. Explain.
I believe that you need a chairman and a CEO. I think that's fine to split the roles. We have it here. I think that the board needs to have their own leader with the chairman, separate from management. So the key here is you got to make sure that the chairman and the CEO work together. If not, you got to decide how to deal with that quickly. That was a little bit of a concern here at AIG, for example, in my own relationship. I believe that comp committees have to really provide independent oversight of what's happening in the compensation programs. That's a check and balance. I do that with my own management. It's important that we have different checks and balances of organizations so that people are doing that. But quite frankly, if you have management that wants to do things that are not appropriate or not address issues and not get it to the board, the chances are it won't happen and the board will never find out until it's too late.
Say on pay?
Say on pay, I think is an important one. Look, I am pleased, and you should be pleased. The vote this year, ex the U.S. Treasury, was almost 99.5% voted yes on say for pay for AIG. That is not the case for many other companies. And so when you do it right and you perform well and you run the company the right way, and our shareholders are happy that we're paying back the American government. They're happy that we're improving the fundamentals of this company. If we perform well and we pay okay, that's fine. But if you cannot keep paying big amounts of money when the stock is down 50%. It's a problem.
Now, let me ask you a couple of questions about AIG and our days together at Treasury and what's happened since. I remember saying at AIG, at Treasury, when AIG was coming to visit, that my grandchildren will have children before we will ever see AIG able to repay all of this money to the taxpayer.
You said that.
I did say that, and I think I said it to you.
I know. And you're willing to say this in front of a camera.
Well, I'm not willing to say it now 2 years later until I hear from Bob Benmosche as to what publicly is sort of the lay of the land governing AIG relative to its obligation to Treasury. Is there anything publicly you can say, or should I go on to the next question?
Well, we could say publicly right now that if you look at the basic $182 billion, this is the amount of money that's available. Because of the changes we made in 2009 about financial products, that we're not going to close it quickly. We're going to retain the people. We're going to be able to pay some people. We're going to get the money back in terms of the clawback so that we can continue to function. Those people helped us not use the last 21 billion or so.
That's available if you need
That was
it.
available. We needed. We didn't need it because we didn't have to expend it to close that down until later. So that was money not used. So, but if you start at 182 and that piece of it, right now we have paid back roughly $152 billion. We have 30 billion left to go. The U.S. Treasury owns just over a billion shares of AIG. That's about 61% of the company today. The stock is trading in the low 30s right now.
What was it back when we were talking about it?
When you and I were talking about it, we were probably back down in the low 20s.
I see.
When I first arrived at AIG, when they announced me, it was $13 a share. So today we've done pretty well. I think the Treasury will get out for TARP. That piece of it will get out with their money. But I think when it's all said and done, which I said to the Congressional Oversight Panel in May of 2010, what I said to that panel, which they vehemently disagreed with me on, and they criticized me, and they almost try to humiliate me in front of the public. What they said was, "Are you kidding me?
You mean, are you kidding? We'll never see.
We'll
this
never
money.
see that money," and they will see a 10 to 15 billion dollar profit after interest.
So you think I will be proven wrong sooner rather than later in my
Oh,
representation?
pretty soon, Ken.
Now let me ask you this. Back in those days, you came to see me, and you came to see the Secretary and others at Treasury. And you told me, at least, Ken, if you don't sit with me and get realistic about pay, this is symbolism, and it is understandable symbolism. But there is a danger that you will drive this company into bankruptcy. I sort of smiled at that. That's Benmosche playing poker. Did you really think then, as we were sitting down for the first time to talk about pay, that was a realistic likelihood, or was it Benmosche playing poker with Ken Feinberg and others at Treasury?
It was actually the truth.
You were concerned about this.
I knew that if I didn't succeed, and if you recall in our November board meeting, and that's when I said, if this continues, we won't make it. You and I sitting down in that first week of December and coming to terms with everything we needed to do, and the fact that the people of AIG believed that I would do the right thing for them, that they weren't working for nothing, that they could start to earn back some of the lost income. If it wasn't for that meeting, I believe AIG wouldn't be here today. I believe that probably the U.S. government might have gotten most of its money back, but the bondholders, and remember the bondholders sit in pension funds for unions and for other people in this country. You're talking about, close to $80 billion could have been lost to the bondholders, the shareholders, and so we were pretty close to the edge. And I think that by you allowing us to continue to have an appropriate program, reasonably balanced, my commitment to you that we'll pay for performance as an entire company, which we've lived up to and done it very well, that has allowed us to get the people to believe enough in themselves, and that you and the United States government believed in them, that if they pull it off and pay back the government, and hopefully with a profit at that point in time, that they could have their careers and their reputations again. It worked, but it was not a negotiation. It was
a reality.
Look, they were going to sell AIA. If they could get $20 billion for it, they were happy. As you know, we'll sell it for close to $35 billion. That's $15 billion right there. They were going to close financial products. Would have cost them $10 to $20 billion. It didn't. It made a $4 billion profit. That's another $15 billion. That's $30 billion right there. And we can go through all the other things this group of 100,000 at the point of people did every day. They came to work every day to solve these problems. And so we kept them energized because they knew they could trust that they're going to get paid, and they could pay their bills, pay their mortgages, and take care of their families.
An interesting sort of a side question about all of this. I dealt, in my role as the pay czar, I dealt with 7 companies under the law. 6 of those companies, all very distinguished companies, good people, they came down to Washington to talk about pay. They sent a general counsel, or they sent a vice president for human resources, or they sent the chairman of the Independent Compensation Committee. Once in a great while, maybe, I'd have to go back and check. But once in a great while, maybe a CEO single visit. Bob Benmosche came down to see me probably 7, 8, 9 times, maybe more. Certainly talked on the telephone as well as personal visits. Your style, Bob, of not only negotiating, but of seeing a problem through. I'm intrigued, and I think our listeners, our viewers would be intrigued. What drove you, and what drives you today, but what drove you then to get on an airplane, come down to Treasury? You'll see Secretary Geithner, you'll see Neil Wolin, you'll see Milstein, and then you'll go and you'll sit for hours with Ken Feinberg. What is your style of sort of your performance matrix that led you to deal so directly and hands-on so many times with so many people? What is there about the way you manage a company like this?
Well, it's about taking everything you do personal and take personal responsibility. And what I said to all the employees when I did town meetings is, you do what you do and do it better than you've ever done it before. You keep focused on fixing this company. I will make sure you get paid for what you do. I'll take that on as my responsibility. And I will prevent anybody from ever attacking this company or you ever again. Your families don't have to live in fear anymore. We're going to fix that problem. I'll do that. You do your job. And if you can get 100,000 employees, which we had at the time, we're down to 65 because we sold off 2 companies, but they knew that I meant it, and I did. And so you can't delegate that. And we did. If you recall, I wasn't there in the beginning. We had that going on for a couple of months where we had just the same structure.
But it was stalled.
It was wrong because it was about solving a problem instead of representing the people who are looking to you for their leadership. And if I promise them I'm going to do something for them and I deliver, then they need to deliver for me.
Has that always been your style of sort of assuming that obligation? Pretty stressful, isn't it? Pretty stressful to do it that way?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I had 360, which is an examination of how people above me and around me feel about my performance. And I was told many years ago that my strength as a leader is I take personal responsibility for everything. And they said my weakness is I take personal responsibility for everything. It's the way I was raised. I was raised by a mother. I lost my dad when I was 10. He left my mom in 1954 with 4 children, 12, 10, 5, and 3. And she was $250,000 in debt and no insurance. And you know what? She paid off every dime. She did it with a smile. She didn't pay for it. We all had to pay for education, but she made us all go through college, made sure we all got our degrees. And she said, you learn in life, don't take yourself so seriously, and make sure you don't forget the people who you work with. Treat them with respect, and they'll treat you with respect. Some people will disappoint you, but don't let the ones who disappoint you affect how you feel about the others. And if you live your life that way, you will be very successful. And my mom gave me great advice. And so I always remember that I work for them being the people of this company or any company I've worked for, any job I've had. And if I work for them and I do the right things for them, we'll deliver. It's not about, do you understand I'm the boss? And there are too many people, Ken, that I always joke about, do you know who I am? When you're the two, who do you think I am? And you know, it's not healthy. People want to know that they're supported and they're encouraged, and that if they make a mistake, you'll help them.
Do you find, I hear from many people, that there's sort of a disconnect between the realities of the marketplace and the day-to-day decisions you've got to make and the government? Not only the federal government, not just federal government as federal government, but the Congress and state governments and commissioners of regulation. Do you find that sometimes there's a disconnect or a failure to appreciate the culture and the sense and the problems you confront in the private marketplace?
I think.
I mean, you went to Congress a few times, and I guess you told it like it was. And
well, actually, the only time I had to appear before Congress was after 9/11, And it was a question of, as you know, MetLife was the largest life insurer and disability income insurer for the companies at the World Trade Center. It cost us almost $400 million during that period of time. And I was here to talk about MetLife's role and what we're going to do to make sure that we do the right thing, and we did the right thing then. In fact, as you know, we invested in the stock market. That's not what we normally do, just to prove that the American system was strong. And in fact, we helped turn around the stock market back during that crisis. That's what MetLife was all about, and I went to talk about that. But I have not been called before Congress, and I think because the last I heard from Congress was after some of the debates in August of '09, and they said, look, give him the benefit of the doubt. He should be a little bit less critical of us. But they let me do my job, and that's what they've let me do.
You know, after 9/11 and after I finished the Victim Compensation Fund, I saw Senator Kennedy, and I said, Senator Kennedy, how come Congress hasn't asked me to come up and explain how the fund worked? I haven't had a request from the Senate. I haven't had a request from the House. He looked at me, he said, are you crazy? Let it go. They're not calling you to come up there because they have nothing to say except good things the way the fund worked. And maybe, just maybe, what's the point of calling Bob Benmosche up to the hill when, as you've pointed out earlier, AIG is returning the investment and paying back the federal government with interest? So maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of it.
Maybe our federal government has to start saying thank you once in a while.
Well, maybe.
Thank you for paying us back. Thank you for working hard. Thank you for proving us wrong that you could actually pay back the American taxpayers with a profit.
Have you?
And thank the people of AIG for everything they did for the American economy and still do today as a major insurer in this country.
Have you publicly commented at any time on whether or not you believe the TOP program and the federal government's assistance to AIG was sound public policy?
I've never been asked a question, so you'll be the first to hear it. I believe that we acted appropriately and we were decisive. Could we have done it differently? Absolutely. Could we have done it better? Absolutely. Are there better alternatives than we took? Absolutely. But we needed to do something. But let me make a point.
Go ahead.
I think what I worry about the most, Ken, is that we should have just said we acted, that you may not realize the consequences. The financial system would have failed. We would be in a severe depression worldwide today had we not acted. But instead of just acting and then moving forward and fixing it, we started to play the blame game. And that's where we failed. We failed by saying we're going to create laws. We're going to put people in jail. We're going to, there should be a law against people who make bad judgments. If that happened, the entire country would be in jail because all of us made mistakes in our life. No. So that's the issue I have. It's not the actions we took. It's all the things we've done since we took very good, courageous actions.
Were you surprised, Bob? I mean, books have been written about this 2008 crisis. Very few people saw it coming, and very few people have acknowledged that it was inevitable or it was just waiting to happen. What's sort of Benmosche's take on what happened, and will it happen again?
Well, I think to say nobody saw it happening, some of us did. What I personally, well, I saw a lot of the issues, and we did that at MetLife. We saw things where we began to reduce home builders and non-agency mortgage-backed securities and so on. So we saw the danger. It took longer to get to the crisis than it did. I will tell you that I was surprised with the size of the crisis. I had no idea how leveraged some of the other institutions had become. And that's where I think that we didn't have good controls and regulatory controls in place to say there's a certain amount of leverage you can take. And you've got to be careful about what happens when you overexpose yourself to certain markets and so on down the line. And so I think we learned a lesson in terms of the liquidity crisis. But you go back, there's a movie, everyone should see it. It's to me, it's my motivational movie every year. It's A Wonderful Life. And
you're Jimmy Stewart.
And I'm not sure I'm Jimmy Stewart, but I will tell you that I have a movie theater in Suffern, New York, and it's an old vaudeville theater from 1924. Over 1,000 people crowd in every Christmas time to see It's a Wonderful Life. And it talks about what happens when the country loses confidence. And what happens, in this case, when a town loses confidence in its savings and loan. And people are corrupt and they do things that are inappropriate. What's important here is that for the financial system, that we make sure that no one gets to the point where their liquidity and their exposure could bring down the banking system. And I talk about the banking system because that's the key. And so when you look at banks and how they're exposed, and I hear the complaints that we should not be limited to how our exposure to be in one single institution, I think we need to be careful about how we argue that point, because Lehman was a serious concern. AIG was a serious concern in terms of its exposure. So, but I think regulators have to make sure that we've got ring-fenced some of the bigger problems and that the free market system works.
Now, do you think it's likely? I mean, have we learned our lesson as a country or as a nation? Or does history tell us there'll be a period where we'll listen to Benmosche's prescriptions, but then human nature being what it is, there will be a gradual return at some point to the dangerous situation we found ourselves in a few years ago? So I mean, that requires you to look sort of philosophically into your crystal ball.
Well, let's see. The work of Glass-Steagall and the 34 Act and the 40 Act and so on was to make sure that the crash of 29 doesn't happen again, and we do a better job of preventing that disaster. Reg T came out in terms of over-leveraging securities and buying on margin. I guess 1987 proved to be a problem, as we had probably the worst stock market crash in history if you count 4 o'clock on Friday to the end of Monday, the 16th through the 19th of October, 1987. It was a disaster. It would be like today seeing the Dow Industrial go down 3,000 to 4,000 points in a day. And so, I guess long-term capital had a problem, didn't they? A little bit too much leverage, too many derivatives, Nobel Prize winners, and I guess I'm sorry, the dot-com did happen, didn't it? And I guess there again was a sizzle and ideas and so on. And so I guess there'll be another crisis, but maybe what we have to do is, instead of playing gotcha, maybe we could learn a lesson here, and maybe we should just watch the problems, deal with them as they come, and don't be afraid to deal with them. See, I'm worried today with the climate that exists today, that there's so many people thinking about who did it and who did wrong.
Lack of trust.
Yeah, but then people are not going to take action this time. That's a fear.
Bob Benmosche, it is always refreshing to see you again. On behalf of Critical Debrief, thanks very much.
Great to be
thank
with
you.